3 sisters stood before the Duke as brides. But he chose the servant pouring their tea. Hello, everyone. On a rain-darkened afternoon in northern England, 3 carefully dressed sisters entered Hawthorne Hall, believing one of them might leave betrothed to a duke. None of them paid much attention to the quiet servant carrying the Whitmore silver tea service behind them. But before the afternoon was over, Duke Elias Whitmore would notice something in her that no title, fortune, or polished accomplishment could imitate. If stories of wounded hearts, quiet dignity, and love found where society least expects it speak to you, please subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell. Your support helps these stories continue. Hawthorne Hall stood above the moors beneath a low gray sky, its stone walls darkened by rain and generations of memory. At 38, Elias Whitmore, Duke of Hartwell, had inherited not only the estate, but every expectation attached to his name. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark brown hair, gray-blue eyes, and a narrow scar near his left temple that society politely pretended not to notice. Elias preferred it that way. That morning, Samuel Pierce, his steward, had reminded him that the Whitmore line required an heir and that 3 suitable young women would arrive before afternoon tea. Elias had answered without looking up from the estate papers. I am aware. Beneath the table, his thumb rested against the silver pocket watch once carried by his father. Duty had governed most of Elias's adult life. He had long since stopped asking whether duty and happiness were meant to know each other. Shortly after 3, a carriage bearing the Prescott crest crossed the rain-darkened drive. Margaret Prescott emerged first, composed and purposeful, followed by her 3 daughters. Madeline, 27, carried herself with the calm precision of a woman trained from childhood to understand rank. Vivian, 24, possessed easy charm and a quick smile perfectly suited to drawing rooms. Rose, only 20, was gentler in manner and looked less like a woman seeking a husband than one trying not to disappoint her mother. Each was respectable. Each was accomplished. Each had been brought to Hawthorne Hall because Margaret believed a marriage to Elias might restore the Prescott family's fading influence. In the west drawing room, Clara Bennett arranged the tea service while Edith more quietly checked the room. Clara was 24 and had worked at Hawthorne Hall for 4 years. She sent part of nearly every month's wages to her younger brother Arthur, who was completing an apprenticeship in a nearby market town, and she had learned to measure every expense before spending a penny on herself. She had also learned something more valuable in houses like Hawthorne Hall: how to be present without being noticed. Her chestnut brown hair was pinned neatly beneath her cap, her pale green eyes lowered as she moved behind the guests. Margaret praised Madeline's education. Vivian asked Elias about the coming London season. Rose listened more than she spoke. Clara poured tea. Elias noticed her only in fragments at first: steady hands, quiet movements, the way she refilled Rose's cup before being asked. Then the younger maid assisting Clara caught the edge of the table. A spoon struck the floor. Rose's saucer tipped, sending tea across the linen. The maid went white. Margaret's expression hardened immediately. Careless girl. Before the frightened servant could speak, Clara stepped forward. It was my fault, ma'am. I placed the tray too close. Elias looked up. He had seen exactly what happened. Clara had not caused it. She knelt, retrieved the fallen spoon, and accepted the full weight of Margaret's displeasure without hesitation. You need not take blame that is not yours, Elias said. The room fell quiet. Clara raised her eyes to him for the first time. There was no invitation in them. No calculation. Only calm restraint. Sometimes blame costs one person more than another, Your Grace. Something in the answer held him still. Clara lowered her gaze, finished serving the tea, and left the drawing room carrying the silver pot, as though nothing unusual had happened. Conversation resumed. Margaret spoke again of Madeline's accomplishments. Vivian smiled at Elias. Rose remained thoughtful, but Elias heard little of it. His thumb had stopped moving against his father's pocket watch. Across the room sat 3 women society considered suitable for him, yet his attention remained on the closed door through which a servant had disappeared. For the first time that afternoon, Elias Whitmore wondered what kind of woman willingly accepted a wound that had been meant for someone else. The closed door remained in Elias's thoughts long after Clara disappeared behind it. He answered Margaret Prescott with practiced courtesy, listened while Vivian spoke brightly of London charities, and asked Rose about her reading, Yet some part of his attention remained fixed on the servant who had accepted blame without hesitation. By the time afternoon tea ended, the rain had strengthened into a relentless downpour, making the roads unsafe and forcing the Prescott family to remain at Hawthorne Hall overnight. Edith Moore appeared at the drawing room threshold as Margaret began discussing guest chambers. "Your Grace, there is a difficulty. One of the upstairs maids has injured her ankle, and we are short-handed." Elias glanced toward Thomas Caldwell, but the butler was already being summoned by a tenant messenger waiting in the entrance hall. "Rearrange the staff as necessary," Elias said. Edith hesitated. "Miss Bennet knows the guest rooms and their household inventories better than anyone. Mrs. Prescott and her daughters will need her upstairs. Unfortunately, Mr. Pierce also needs her records to check several winter deliveries before tomorrow's estate review." That caught Elias's attention. "Why Miss Bennet's records?" "She keeps the room inventories," Edith replied. "Without them, Mr. Pierce cannot compare what was delivered with what the household actually received." Margaret's expression tightened faintly. Surely estate business need not depend upon a servant. Clara had just returned to collect the silver tea service. She lowered her eyes, but Elias noticed the slight stillness in her posture. "Miss Bennet will bring the records to the East Library first," he said. "Afterward, she may assist upstairs." Margaret looked surprised. Clara merely inclined her head. "Yes, Your Grace." An hour later, Elias entered the East Library expecting Samuel Pierce. Instead, he found Clara standing beside a ladder, arranging account books while rain tapped against the narrow windows. A smaller stack of household inventories sat open on the table. "Where is Pierce?" Elias asked. "Called to the lower farm." A drainage wall gave way. Clara stepped down and reached for another ledger. Elias frowned at its weight. "You should not carry those alone." She looked at the book, then at him. "They will not become lighter because I object to them." For a moment, he nearly smiled. "Do you always speak this plainly to your employer?" "Only when my employer asks questions with obvious answers." She realized what she had said and lowered her gaze. "Forgive me. Do not." His answer came too quickly. Silence settled between them. Clara turned back to the table. Elias removed his coat, laid it across a chair, and lifted the heaviest ledger himself. She stared. "Your Grace." "What? You are carrying it." "I had noticed. That is not usually what dukes do." Perhaps that explains why so many dukes are intolerable. A small, unwilling smile touched Clara's mouth before she hid it. Elias felt something shift between them, slight enough to deny and impossible not to notice. They worked in silence for several minutes. Clara checked each inventory against the labels Samuel had left, while Elias carried the larger volumes to the shelves. He noticed she never rushed merely because he was present. She noticed he did not abandon the work once the novelty of helping a servant had passed. When they reached the final stack, Clara paused over the dark blue tenant ledger. Her expression changed. "Something wrong?" Elias asked. "No, Your Grace." She set it down too quickly. "You recognized it." Clara hesitated. "I have seen Mr. Pierce use it when discussing winter charges with the household office." "And?" "Nothing." Elias studied her. "You are not a convincing liar." Her expression cooled. Servants are not generally encouraged to form opinions about estate accounts. There it was again, the boundary she never forgot, even when he did. Elias touched his father's pocket watch. Through his waistcoat. "I did not ask what servants are encouraged to do. I asked what you noticed." Clara looked at him for a long moment, measuring whether his interest was genuine or merely amusement from a man who could afford curiosity. Then she opened the blue ledger and placed one of her household inventories beside it. Her finger moved between two entries. These cottages were charged twice for the same winter fuel delivery. Elias bent closer. The dates matched. So did the amounts. "How did you catch that?" "Because the same delivery appears in the household record." She paused. "And because I know what those families can afford." He looked at her differently then. Clara had expected him to dismiss the observation or summon Samuel and forget who had made it. Instead, Elias closed the ledger carefully. "Tomorrow morning, you will show this to Pierce with me present." Her eyes widened. "That would not be proper." "No," Elias said. "But I am beginning to think proper and right have been confused in this house for far too long." By morning, the storm had weakened to a pale drizzle, but the discovery in the East Library had already unsettled the rhythm of Hawthorne Hall. Samuel Pierce stood at the long oak table with the dark blue ledger open before him, while Clara placed the household inventory beside it. Elias remained near the window, watching rather than intervening. These entries were copied from the winter accounts, Samuel said, his expression tightening. I approved the totals myself. Clara folded her hands at her waist. Then I may have misunderstood what I saw. Elias looked at her. She did not sound doubtful. She sounded careful. You did not, he said. Samuel glanced between them, pride briefly hardening his face before responsibility overcame it. He pulled another book from the shelf and compared the dates. Several minutes passed in tense silence. At last he exhaled. 6 cottages were charged twice. Clara's relief was slight, but visible to Elias. How serious is it? He asked. Samuel's mouth tightened. Serious enough that some families would receive demands they could not meet. Correct them today, Elias said. Then find out how it happened. Samuel nodded before turning toward Clara. You prevented 6 households from paying for our mistake. Clara shook her head. I noticed matching entries. That is all. No, Samuel replied. You noticed the people behind them. The compliment unsettled her more than criticism might have. Before she could answer, Margaret Prescott entered with Madeline and Vivian, Rose following several steps behind. Margaret stopped when she saw Clara beside the estate books. I was told breakfast had been delayed by urgent business. I did not realize household servants now participated in estate decisions. Clara stepped back automatically. Elias noticed how practiced the movement was. Miss Bennet identified an accounting error, he said. Margaret smiled without warmth. How industrious. Vivian's gaze moved from Clara to Elias with sharpened interest. Madeline remained composed. Surely Mr. Pierce can handle the matter now. Elias could have dismissed Clara and restored the proper order of the room. Instead, he looked at her. Tell them what the error would have meant. Clara's eyes widened. Your Grace, that is not necessary. I think it is. For a moment, Elias watched pride and caution struggle behind her expression. Speaking could make her seem presumptuous. Silence would turn struggling families back into columns of ink. Compassion won. The cottages are near the north boundary, she said quietly. Most of the tenants depend on seasonal wages. A second fuel charge before spring could force some to choose between heating their homes and buying food. Rose's expression changed first. That much. For some families, yes, miss. Rose lowered her eyes. Margaret said nothing. Vivian's curiosity lost some of its amusement. Elias understood something then that he had not fully seen before. Clara's restraint was not meekness. It was discipline. She measured every word because the world charged her more dearly for speaking than it charged people like him. Later, after the Prescotts left for the conservatory and Samuel went to collect older accounts, Clara carried a small tray into the library with tea for the steward. One cup was plain white, marked by a thin crack. In the glaze, Elias, still reviewing correspondence, noticed she kept that cup for herself. The kitchen serves cracked china now, he asked. Clara glanced down. Not to guests. Then why keep it? Mrs. Moore was going to discard it. It still holds tea. Elias picked it up carefully. Most people prefer things without damage. Most people prefer the appearance of perfection. She removed a folded cloth from the tray. That does not make perfection the same as worth. The words struck more deeply than she could have known. Elias's fingers moved instinctively to the narrow scar beside his left temple, then toward the pocket watch beneath his waistcoat. Clara noticed both movements. She did not stare. More strangely, she did not pretend not to have seen. She simply lowered her gaze, offering privacy without pity. That mercy disarmed him. You believe damaged things should be kept? He asked. Clara looked back at him. I believe being marked by what happened to you is not the same as being ruined by it. The library seemed suddenly too quiet. Elias had spent years among people who praised his title, feared his judgment, or politely avoided every fracture beneath his composure. Clara Bennet had looked directly at one and refused to treat it as weakness. He set the cup down with unusual care. Samuel is reviewing the remaining tenant accounts this afternoon. Clara stiffened. I have duties upstairs. I know. Elias paused. I am asking Edith to release you from them. She studied him cautiously. Because I am a servant who found an error? Because you saw what neither Samuel nor I saw. Something in Clara's expression shifted. Not trust yet, but perhaps the first possibility of it. Elias looked toward the dark blue ledger. Help us finish this properly. Clara hesitated only once before answering. Then I will. By noon, the East Library no longer felt like a quiet room of books. Samuel Pierce had spread the tenant ledgers across the long oak table, while Clara checked household records against winter charges with the same careful attention that had first caught Elias's notice. Elias remained near the window with correspondence in hand, though he had read the same paragraph twice. The duplicated fuel entries were not isolated. 3 more appeared under different headings, each small enough to seem harmless, together large enough to trouble him. These were entered over several months, Samuel said at last. Then someone expected no one to compare the household records with the tenant accounts, Clara replied. Samuel looked at her sharply. Clara immediately lowered her gaze, but Elias did not miss the instinct behind her words. She saw patterns because she understood what those numbers meant to people who could not afford mistakes. Before he could answer, Thomas Caldwell entered carrying a sealed letter. Your Grace. From your solicitor in London. Marked urgent. Elias broke the seal. As he read, his expression hardened. The solicitor confirmed irregular payments within the winter maintenance fund and warned that unless the discrepancies were explained before the quarterly review, responsibility would rest with Elias as head of the estate. Samuel went pale. I should have seen this. Elias folded the letter. We will determine what happened before we decide who failed. Clara glanced at him. It was slight, but he caught the surprise. She had expected anger from a powerful man confronted with embarrassment. Instead, he had chosen restraint. The library door opened again. Margaret Prescott entered with Madeline and Vivian, rose several steps behind them. They had come to remind Elias of luncheon. Margaret stopped the moment she saw Clara seated beside the estate records. I had assumed yesterday's arrangement was temporary. Elias placed the solicitor's letter beside the dark blue ledger. It was. Then why is Miss Bennet still involved? Clara rose automatically. I can return to my duties, Your Grace. The old instinct was immediate. Step backward, become useful, become invisible. Elias saw it more clearly than ever. Sit down. The words were quiet. They changed the room. Clara remained standing for one heartbeat before obeying. Margaret's face tightened. Vivian's interest sharpened. Madeline gave nothing away, while Rose watched Clara rather than Elias. Miss Bennet identified the first error, Elias said. She knows the household records and will continue assisting Mr. Pierce until the review is complete. Margaret stared at him. You intend to give a servant access to confidential estate matters? I intend to use the judgment of the person who saw what the rest of us overlooked. Silence followed. Elias knew exactly what he had done. Until that moment, his interest in Clara could still have been dismissed as courtesy. This could not. He had placed her judgment above convention in front of the very family, expecting him to choose a wife among them. Clara understood it too. Your Grace, she said carefully, people will notice. Let them. Her eyes lifted to his. There was no triumph there, only concern. You may not pay the same price for being noticed that I do. The truth landed harder than accusation. Elias could defend her and still leave her carrying consequences he would never feel. Then I will answer for my part in it, he said. Margaret gave a faint, incredulous laugh. This is becoming unnecessarily personal. Elias turned toward her. No, it is becoming accurate. Margaret said nothing more, but when she left the library, Vivian followed with one last calculating glance toward Clara. Rose hesitated as though she wanted to speak, then went after them. Samuel soon departed to retrieve more records, leaving Elias and Clara alone beside the rain-streaked windows. You should not have done that, Clara said. Acknowledge that you were right? Made certain everyone knows you believe I belong in this room. Do you not? Clara looked toward the ledgers. Belonging is not always decided by ability. Elias had no answer to that. For 4 years, she had survived Hawthorne Hall by remaining almost unseen. In less than a week, he had made that impossible. Footsteps sounded beyond the door. Vivian appeared in the corridor, her expression perfectly pleasant and her eyes anything but. Miss Bennet, she said softly, my mother would like to speak with you. Clara's face remained composed, but Elias saw her fingers tighten once against her skirt. For the first time, he understood that defending her had not ended the danger. It had announced her importance. Clara found Margaret Prescott waiting in the morning room with Madeline and Vivian, while Rose stood near the window, looking as though she wished herself elsewhere. The door closed softly behind Clara. Margaret did not invite her to sit. "You have been given an extraordinary amount of latitude," she said. "I would advise you not to mistake it for elevation." Clara held her hands loosely before her. "I have made no such mistake, ma'am." Vivian gave a quiet laugh. "Have you not? His Grace defending you before his guests, asking your opinion on estate matters, keeping you at his side, while 3 women of proper standing are here for an entirely different purpose. It would confuse anyone." The humiliation was precise because it contained enough truth to wound. Clara felt heat rise beneath her collar, but she refused to let it reach her voice. "I did not ask for his Grace's attention." "Then you will have no objection to ending it," Margaret replied. She offered Clara an envelope. Inside was enough money to secure Arthur's apprenticeship for years and allow Clara to leave service altogether. "Take this. Go to your brother. Begin somewhere else." Quietly. For one terrible moment, Clara imagined it. Arthur free of worry, herself beyond Hawthorne Hall, beyond whispered judgments, beyond Elias Whitmore's increasingly dangerous kindness. It was the easier road, perhaps even the wiser one. She folded the envelope closed and placed it on the table. "No," Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Do not be foolish. If I leave, it will be because I choose to leave. I will not accept money to make another person more comfortable with my absence." Rose looked at her then with something close to admiration. Vivian's expression hardened. "You think dignity changes what you are?" Clara met her gaze. "No. I think dignity changes what I am willing to become." She left before her composure could break. By evening, the entire household knew enough to sense tension, though not its cause. Elias found Clara in the passage outside the East Library, carrying account sheets Samuel had requested. "Mrs. Prescott spoke with you." It was not a question. Clara stopped. "Yes." "What did she say?" "That is between Mrs. Prescott and me." His jaw tightened. "Clara." It was the first time he had spoken her given name. The sound of it unsettled them both. She looked at him carefully. "She offered me money to leave." Something cold entered Elias's face. "How much?" "Enough." "And you refused?" "Yes." "Why?" Clara almost laughed at the injustice of the question. "Because I will not be purchased into disappearance." Elias went very still. In another life, another week, he might have dismissed the Prescotts to protect his household from scandal. Instead, something in him crossed a line he could not uncross. "Then they will leave." Clara stared. "Your Grace, no. Mrs. Prescott insulted a member of my household and attempted to interfere with estate business by removing someone essential to an open review. She is here because you are expected to choose among her daughters. I know exactly why she is here. Then do not destroy that arrangement because of me." Elias stepped closer, though he kept enough distance to preserve every boundary between them. "This is not because of you alone. It is because I have spent too many years allowing duty to be defined by whoever speaks most confidently in its name." His hand closed around his father's pocket watch beneath his coat. "That ends tonight. At dinner." Before Margaret could begin another polished conversation about Madeline's suitability, Elias set down his glass. "Mrs. Prescott, your family will remain as my guests until the roads are fully clear. But there will be no private discussions concerning Miss Bennet, her employment, or her place in this household. Any attempt to influence her departure will be treated as interference in my affairs." Silence spread across the table. Madeline lowered her eyes. Vivian went pale with anger. Rose looked toward Clara, who stood near the sideboard, stunned. Margaret's smile became brittle. "You risk unnecessary gossip, Your Grace." Elias looked directly at her. "Then let them gossip accurately." After dinner, Samuel intercepted him outside the library, carrying the blue ledger and a second packet of papers. "Your Grace, we found something else." Elias took the documents. Several winter charges had been redirected through an account bearing an authorization mark neither Samuel nor Clara recognized. At the bottom of the newest page was a name connected to the Prescott estate. Elias read it twice. Then he looked toward the corridor where Clara had disappeared. Whatever had begun as a servant noticing numbers had become something far larger, and now the woman he had chosen to defend stood at the center of a truth neither of them had yet seen clearly. Samuel placed the second packet beside the dark blue ledger and turned one page toward Elias. The mark was small, almost ordinary, but the name beneath it changed the air in the library. Prescott. Clara arrived moments later at Samuel's request, and stopped when she saw Elias standing motionless beside the table. What happened? Elias did not answer at once. His thumb had found his father's silver pocket watch beneath his coat, the same movement Clara had begun to recognize whenever something inside him threatened to break through restraint. Samuel pointed to several entries. Money intended for the North Cottages was redirected through old Prescott claims. Not once. Repeatedly. Clara looked closer. But the Prescott estate does not supply those cottages. Exactly. Samuel's voice lowered. Someone used an arrangement that existed years ago and made it look as though it never ended. Elias opened the pocket watch. Clara had never seen the inside before. Beneath the hands, engraved into the silver, were 4 words: duty before personal desire. She looked from the inscription to his face. Your father? Elias gave a humorless smile. His favorite lesson. He closed the watch again, though his fingers remained around it. He believed affection made men careless. That a man protected his name by never allowing emotion to interfere with obligation. Clara understood then that his coldness had never come from indifference. It had been taught into him, polished until it looked like character. Was there an agreement with the Prescotts? She asked. Elias nodded. 6 winters ago, their estate nearly failed after severe flooding. My father authorized temporary assistance. Margaret Prescott knew he expected our families to remain connected. Samuel unfolded another sheet. The later claims copied that old arrangement. Whoever continued them relied on the assumption that you would see the Prescott name and never question it. The meaning struck deeper than missing money. Elias had not simply been deceived. His obedience had been studied and used against him. Clara saw the realization land in his eyes. Who approved the later payments? She asked. Samuel slid one final document across the table. It bore a Whitmore authorization mark. Elias stared at it. That is not mine. Clara felt the room tighten. Then someone counted on your silence before you ever knew you were being asked for it. Elias's expression hardened. I will speak to Mrs. Prescott now. He reached for the papers. Clara covered them with her hand first. Not yet. His eyes lifted sharply. You are asking me to wait while someone used my family name to take from people who trusted me? I am asking you to know exactly whom you are accusing. You think I would act blindly? Pride flashed through him. Clara almost stepped back. Instead, she held his gaze. I think you have spent your whole life proving you are not ruled by feeling. That does not mean feeling cannot rule you when you are hurt. Silence followed. Samuel turned away, suddenly very interested in the shelves. Elias released the papers. You speak boldly for someone who once worked so hard not to be noticed. The words struck harder than he intended. Clara's face changed. And you listen very carefully to me for someone who may only value what I can uncover for your estate. Regret crossed his expression immediately. Is that what you think? I do not know what to think. Her voice remained quiet, which made it worse. A week ago I carried your tea and left the room unnoticed. Now your guests resent me. Your household watches me. And I am standing beside evidence that may disgrace the family you were expected to marry into. Elias looked at her as though she had placed a truth between them he could not move around. You believe my regard for you began with these accounts. I believe neither of us has had time to understand what it began with. For the first time since he had defended her, Clara stepped deliberately away from him. The distance felt colder than anger. Before Elias could answer, the library door opened. Rose Prescott stood there, pale, holding a folded letter with both hands. Your Grace, she said, looking first at Elias and then at Clara, my mother does not know I found this. She crossed the room and placed the letter beside the pocket watch. Clara recognized the Prescott seal immediately. Rose swallowed. I think this explains why she was so certain one of us would become your wife. Rose's hands trembled as Elias unfolded the letter. The Prescott seal was familiar, but the words inside changed the room. Margaret's handwriting was neat and deliberate. She had instructed a former Prescott agent to continue drawing money through the old Whitmore agreement, burying the transfers among ordinary winter expenses and reproducing the necessary approvals so the entries would appear legitimate. One sentence stopped Elias cold. Hartwell will see only what his father taught him to expect. Clara's eyes moved toward the silver pocket watch beside the ledger. The second sentence was worse. Once one of the Prescott daughters became Duchess of Hartwell, the irregular accounts could be absorbed quietly into the affairs of both estates. Rose looked as though the floor had shifted beneath her. My mother has spoken of this marriage for years, she whispered. I thought she wanted security for us. I did not know she had built it on this. Samuel compared the letter with the dark blue ledger. The dates match. The copied Whitmore approvals begin shortly after these instructions. Elias stared at the papers. For years, his father's lesson had shaped every difficult decision. Duty before personal desire. Margaret had not merely taken money. She had understood that lesson well enough to use it against him. She had counted on Elias seeing the Prescott name, remembering his father's expectations, and asking no further questions. Bring Mrs. Prescott, he told Caldwell when the butler appeared at the door. Alone, Clara stepped forward. Your Grace. Elias turned. We have the evidence. Yes. Then, there is nothing left to wait for. Clara glanced at Rose. There is still the matter of who deserves the consequence. Rose looked at her in surprise. Vivian had mocked Clara. Madeline had barely acknowledged her. Margaret had tried to buy her disappearance. Clara had every reason to let the entire family fall together. Instead, she said, truth should punish the guilty, not everyone who happened to be born beside them. Elias felt his anger settle into something colder and more useful. Caldwell, he said, Mrs. Prescott alone. Her daughters remain outside this. Margaret entered 10 minutes later. One glance at the ledger and Rose's letter was enough. Her face hardened. You searched my private correspondence. Rose flinched. Elias stepped between them. Your daughter prevented theft committed under my name. Margaret recovered quickly. The money preserved an old family. Your father understood that families like ours survive by supporting one another. My father authorized temporary assistance after flooding, Elias said. You turned mercy into permission. Margaret's gaze shifted to Clara. And now a servant presumes to judge obligations she cannot understand. Clara could have retreated. Once she would have. Instead, she stepped beside the table. I understand what happens when powerful households decide poorer people will absorb the cost. Margaret's eyes sharpened. You overstep yourself. Perhaps. Clara's voice remained calm. But those families paid twice for fuel they received once. They carried a burden they were never asked to bear. Elias watched her and understood that the discovery belonged to her as much as anyone. She had noticed the first error. She had insisted they verify the truth before accusing anyone. Now, when silence would have been safer, she chose to speak. Margaret turned back to Elias. Madeline remains an excellent match. Whatever mistake was made can be corrected privately once the families are joined. There it was. The entire life Elias had been trained to accept. Preserve appearances. Protect the name. Choose the suitable bride. Let poorer people bear the inconvenience quietly. His gaze dropped to the pocket watch. Then he placed it beside the forged approvals. Samuel, every affected tenant will be repaid from my personal funds immediately. The ledger, the copied approvals, and this letter go to my solicitor in London tonight. The Prescott estate will repay what was taken. Margaret's composure cracked. You will destroy us. No. I will stop allowing your comfort to depend upon people who were never given a choice. He looked toward Rose. Neither you nor your sisters will be accused without evidence. Then he faced Margaret again. Whatever understanding existed between our families is finished. No one will decide my marriage for me again. The silence was absolute. Margaret had lost more than money. She had lost the certainty that Elias would obey a future designed before he had chosen it. Caldwell escorted her from the room. Rose remained only long enough to whisper, "Thank you," to Clara before following. Samuel gathered the documents for London, leaving Elias and Clara alone with the ledger, the letter, and the pocket watch still resting untouched between them. You ended the arrangement, Clara said softly. I ended something that should never have been called duty. Her gaze fell to the watch. Then what does duty mean now? Elias looked at her. For the first time in his adult life, no inherited answer waited for him. Responsibility without surrendering judgment, he said. And choice without pretending choice is selfish. Clara held his gaze. Neither spoke of marriage. They did not need to. The question of Elias Whitmore's future now belonged to him alone, and whatever answer came next would reveal whether he had truly learned to choose for himself. By the following afternoon, Hawthorne Hall had settled into the uneasy quiet that follows a truth no one can return to secrecy. Samuel had sent corrected statements to the affected tenants, and repayment from Elias's private funds was already being arranged. Caldwell had instructed the household that Madeline, Vivian, and Rose were to be treated with the same courtesy as before. Margaret remained upstairs, speaking to almost no one. Madeline packed quietly. Vivian kept to her room. Only Rose came downstairs. She found Clara in the East Library returning the dark blue ledger to its shelf. "I wanted to thank you," Rose said. Clara turned. "For what?" "For separating what my mother did from who we are." Her voice trembled. "You could have let us share her disgrace." Clara considered her carefully. Pain does not become justice simply because it reaches someone who once stood on the wrong side of it. Rose lowered her eyes. "I should have defended you sooner. You spoke when it mattered most." Rose looked at her for a long moment, then nodded and left. Later that day, Elias rode with Samuel to the North Cottages instead of sending orders from Hawthorne Hall. By evening, Clara heard that he had apologized directly to the families, arranged repairs for a leaking roof, and refused to let Samuel carry the failure alone. Elias had already ended the Prescott family's claim over his future, but Clara now understood something more important. His change was not a performance meant to impress her. He was beginning to use his power differently, even when she was nowhere near him. Before the Prescotts departed the next morning, Margaret requested one final formal tea in the West drawing room. She could no longer claim an agreement between the families. What remained, she insisted, was the question that had brought her daughters to Hawthorne Hall in the first place. Edith prepared the Whitmore silver service. Clara nearly asked another maid to carry it in. Then she stopped. For 4 years, invisibility had protected her. She would not seek it now simply because being seen had become difficult. When Clara entered, Elias stood near the fireplace. Margaret sat rigidly beside the windows. At a quiet instruction from their mother, Madeline, Vivian, and Rose rose and stood together before the Duke. 3 sisters. 3 women who had arrived believing one of them might become Duchess of Hartwell. Clara moved behind them toward the tea table, the silver pot steady in her hands. Margaret looked at Elias. "You have ended every understanding between our families." "Very well. But my daughters were invited here so that you might decide whether any one of them suited you. Before we leave, they deserve an answer that belongs to you rather than to your father, to me, or to scandal." For once, Elias could not disagree with her. He looked first at Madeline. She met his gaze without pleading. Vivian lifted her chin. Rose seemed almost relieved. Clara began pouring the tea. "Then I will answer clearly," Elias said. The room became so quiet that the thin stream striking porcelain sounded unnaturally loud. His gaze moved across the 3 sisters. Clara kept her eyes lowered until the silence stretched too long to ignore. She looked up. Elias was no longer looking at them. He was looking at her. Clara's hand stopped. The silver pot remained suspended above the cup. "None of them," he said. Margaret went pale. Vivian inhaled sharply. Madeline's composure flickered, but held. Rose closed her eyes as though something she had already understood had finally been spoken aloud. Elias stepped around the 3 sisters with no theatrical haste, only certainty. He stopped several feet from Clara. "Miss Bennet, you were never brought here to win my approval. You never asked for my attention. You spoke when silence would have protected you, noticed people others reduced to numbers, and defended even those who had given you little reason for kindness." Clara lowered the teapot slowly. "I will not pretend society will consider this simple," Elias continued. "Nor will I hide where you came from or ask you to become someone else, so my choice appears respectable." Margaret whispered, "Elias." He did not turn. "I have thought carefully enough for one lifetime about what everyone else expected me to choose." His eyes remained on Clara. "The woman I would ask to become my wife is standing beside the tea service." The words landed exactly where every expectation in the room had said they never could. Clara set the silver pot down. Her heart was beating hard, but her voice remained steady. "Your Grace, being chosen is not the same as choosing." Pain crossed Elias's face, but he did not approach her. "No," he said. "It is not." "Then I cannot answer because everyone in this room expects me to." A quieter expression replaced the pain. "Respect." Elias stepped back, giving her the space his title could so easily have denied her. "Then do not answer for them." His voice softened. "Answer only when the answer belongs to you." And for the first time since the 3 Prescott sisters had entered Hawthorne Hall as prospective brides, the room no longer waited to learn whom the Duke would choose. It waited for Clara Bennet to decide whether she would choose him. Clara gave Elias her answer 3 days later in the East Library, where pale winter sunlight had finally broken through the rain. The dark blue ledger lay closed on the oak table. Beside it sat the plain white cup with a narrow crack in its glaze, still useful, still carefully kept. Elias entered alone. For the first time since Clara had known him, his father's silver pocket watch was not in his hand. "You left it upstairs," she said. Elias reached into his coat and placed the watch beside the ledger. "No, I brought it because I finally understand why I kept reaching for it." He opened the case. The old inscription remained beneath the hands. Duty before personal desire. I considered having the words removed. Clara looked at him. "Why did you not?" "Because erasing them would not erase what they made of me." He closed the watch gently. "My father believed duty required a man to distrust his own heart. Margaret understood that better than I did. She knew I had been trained to obey expectations before questioning them." Clara waited. "And now? Now I think duty means responsibility without surrendering judgment." His gaze held hers. "And choice without pretending choice is selfish." The answer carried no bitterness. That mattered. Elias drew a folded letter from his coat. "My solicitor wrote from London this morning. Margaret has accepted responsibility for the unauthorized transfers. Trustees will supervise the Prescott accounts, and their estate will repay what it can over time. What will happen to her daughters? Rose will stay with an aunt in Bath. Madeline intends to help manage what remains of the family property herself." A faint smile touched his mouth. "Vivian sent a note." Clara raised an eyebrow. "An apology?" "No, then perhaps some things require more time." Apparently she did. "Manage an entire page without insulting you." Clara almost smiled. "Remarkable progress." Elias glanced toward the ledger. "Every tenant has been repaid. Samuel corrected the accounts, and work has begun on the roof at the North Cottages." Clara rested her fingertips against the table. Justice had not arrived as spectacle. It had arrived as money returned, homes repaired, authority restrained, and innocent daughters spared the guilt of their mother. That felt right. Elias placed another folded paper beside the watch. Clara recognized Caldwell's handwriting. "There is one more matter. You asked to leave Hawthorne Hall before any of this began. Caldwell found a position near Arthur's apprenticeship. Better wages. A respectable household. If you want it, you can leave next week." Clara studied him. "You arranged that after asking me to become your wife?" "Yes." "Why?" Elias did not move closer. "Because if staying at Hawthorne Hall requires marrying me, then I have not given you a choice at all." The simplicity of the answer unsettled her more than persuasion might have. "I would rather lose you because you chose another life than keep you because you felt indebted to mine." Margaret had offered Clara money to disappear. Society had offered rules that rewarded her for remaining unseen. Elias, with every advantage necessary to shape her future, had placed an open door before her instead. "Arthur wrote yesterday," Clara said. "His apprenticeship is going well. I am glad. He also informed me that I have spent too much of my life arranging everything around what other people need." Elias's mouth softened. "He sounds inconveniently wise. He is 17. I remain hopeful it will pass." Elias laughed quietly, without restraint. The sound warmed something in Clara more than any practiced declaration could have. She touched the cracked cup with one finger. "I used to believe leaving was the only proof that I was free." Elias said nothing. "Now I think freedom is being able to stay without owing anyone the decision." His expression changed, but he remained where he was. "I do not want the position near Arthur." "Then what do you want?" Clara took a slow breath. "I want Hawthorne Hall. I want to continue caring about the people here. I want Arthur to have his own life instead of being the reason I postpone mine." She met Elias's eyes. "And I want you. Not because a duke looked past 3 suitable women and chose a servant. I want the man who listened when I told him he was wrong, repaid people who could never reward him, protected Rose when anger would have been easier, and gave me a way to leave after asking me to stay." Elias crossed half the distance between them and stopped. He left the final step untouched. "Is that your answer?" Clara stepped forward. "Yes." Several weeks later, the corrected accounts were formally presented to the tenants. Elias insisted Clara stand beside Samuel when the discovery was explained. No borrowed title was placed upon her. No convenient story was invented about her birth. The families thanked Clara Bennett by name. That evening, Edith brought the Whitmore silver tea service into the west drawing room. Clara reached instinctively for the pot. Elias took it first. "Allow me." He poured tea into the little cracked cup she had once saved from being discarded. His father's pocket watch rested closed on the nearby table, no longer a command, only a legacy he had learned to carry without obeying blindly. Clara accepted the cup with a quiet smile. She had once survived by making herself invisible. Now she remained because she had been seen clearly and still allowed to choose. Some hearts are not saved by being chosen, but by finally being free to choose.